Apollo 13 left Earth carrying a familiar objective. 3 astronauts, a command module named Odyssey, a lunar module named Aquarius, and a flight plan built around a landing on the Moon. Nothing about the launch suggested that this mission would be remembered differently from the others. The spacecraft climbed into orbit, departed Earth, and settled into the long journey outward. Instruments behaved normally. Communications remained clear. The Moon waited ahead, growing larger day by day. Success seemed easy to define. Reach the Moon. Land. Return. Then the mission moved beyond the point where simple definitions would survive. Far from Earth, a sudden disturbance traveled through the spacecraft. Warning lights appeared. Readings changed. Mission Control began seeing data that did not fit the routine picture they had been watching only moments earlier. The spacecraft was still flying. The crew was still alive. But oxygen was disappearing. At first, the situation seemed difficult rather than catastrophic. Communication remained intact. The astronauts could still speak with Earth. The spacecraft was still moving along its trajectory. The Moon was still ahead. Outside the windows, nothing looked different. Inside the spacecraft, everything was changing. As engineers examined the telemetry, the consequences became impossible to ignore. The oxygen loss was not an isolated problem. The service module had been damaged. Systems that depended on those oxygen supplies were now at risk. The mission could no longer continue toward a landing. The goal that had justified the journey vanished. Yet the spacecraft kept moving deeper into space. This created a strange reality. The destination still existed. The Moon remained visible beyond the windows. The astronauts were still traveling toward it. But they would never land there. A lunar mission had lost its lunar mission. The obvious answer seemed straightforward. Cancel the landing, turn around, go home. That explanation felt reasonable because the crew was alive and Earth still existed behind them. The problem was that going home was not a single action. It was a chain. And every link depended on something else still functioning. Aquarius, the lunar module, had been designed to land 2 astronauts on the Moon. It was never intended to become a lifeboat for 3 people traveling through deep space. Yet that is exactly what it became. The crew powered down Odyssey as much as possible and moved into Aquarius. Equipment that had been planned for a short lunar excursion suddenly became essential for survival. The meaning of the spacecraft changed. Hours earlier, Aquarius had been transportation to the surface. Now it was shelter. The interior quickly became crowded. 3 astronauts shared a space designed around a different purpose. Every watt of electricity mattered. Every system was examined through a new question. How long can this last? The temporary answer remained encouraging. Long enough to get home. But the journey kept revealing new conditions. Water had to be conserved. Electrical power had to be preserved. Navigation could not drift. The spacecraft still needed to follow a path that would bring it back to Earth at exactly the right angle. Too steep, and re-entry could become destructive. Too shallow, and the spacecraft could skip away from Earth altogether. The farther the mission progressed, the less returning home resembled a retreat. It looked more like a balancing act. The Moon eventually filled the windows, not as a destination, as an obstacle that still had to be passed. The spacecraft looped around the far side and began the long arc back toward Earth. For a moment, it might have appeared that the crisis was ending. The trajectory was now pointed home. But another limitation emerged inside Aquarius: carbon dioxide. The crew could remove it from the air, but the available equipment created an unexpected problem. Components from one spacecraft did not naturally fit the systems of another. Filters existed, but compatibility did not. The astronauts remained alive. The hardware required to keep them alive did not cooperate. Inside the cramped cabin, improvised materials began taking on unexpected importance. Plastic bags, cardboard, tape. The result became known as the mailbox. It looked less like advanced space technology than something assembled from leftovers. Yet its appearance was misleading. The device allowed incompatible systems to work together. It transformed available parts into a functioning solution. The spacecraft survived because adaptation replaced design. Each problem solved, another revealed itself. Consumables continued shrinking. Power reserves remained precious. Time itself became a resource being spent. And beneath all of it sat a contradiction that refused to disappear. The spacecraft currently keeping the crew alive was not the spacecraft that would bring them through Earth's atmosphere. Eventually, Aquarius would have to be abandoned. The lifeboat could not complete the journey. As Earth slowly expanded in the distance, attention shifted back toward Odyssey. The command module had spent much of the return voyage powered down to preserve capability for the final stage. No one could fully test every consequence of that shutdown while still in flight. The crew would eventually need to trust the vehicle they had left behind. Then came one of the most revealing images of the mission. The damaged service module finally became visible. Panels were missing. Parts of the spacecraft appeared torn away. Until that moment, much of the failure had existed as numbers, warnings, and consequences. Now the damage could be seen. The mission had not merely lost a landing. It had lost pieces of the spacecraft itself. Yet, the return continued. Earth grew larger. Procedures began. Systems came back online. Aquarius, the craft that had preserved the crew through the crisis, completed its final task. The astronauts transferred back into Odyssey and prepared for re-entry. The lifeboat drifted away. Everything now depended on the spacecraft that had survived the original accident. The atmosphere approached. Then, communication disappeared. Re-entry blackout was expected, but expectations offered little comfort after everything that had already happened. For several minutes, no voices returned. No confirmation arrived. The chain that had carried the mission home remained unfinished. Then the signal came back. Parachutes appeared above the Pacific. The spacecraft descended through clear sky and settled into the ocean. Apollo 13 never landed on the moon. The destination that defined the beginning of the mission became irrelevant long before the mission ended. What remained was a different achievement. Outside the capsule, Pacific water surrounded the spacecraft. Above it, recovery forces moved into position. Inside it, the crew was alive. At the beginning of the journey, success meant standing on the lunar surface. At the end, success floated in the ocean beneath 3 parachutes. The mission failed to reach its intended destination. It succeeded in finding its way home.